I just started a job at 7-Eleven. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but I needed money, and the 24-hour convenience store near my house was hiring. So I filled out an application, went in for an interview, and before I knew it, I had a job. My first shift was on a Friday night. I was scheduled to work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant dealing with all the late-night crazies that wander into convenience stores in the middle of the night. The store manager, Bill, was there to train me. He was a grumpy older guy who clearly hated his job. He spent about 20 minutes showing me how to operate the register and gas pumps before disappearing into the back room, leaving me alone up front. Around 1 a.m., things started to get busy. People were stopping in for late-night snacks, cigarettes, and energy drinks. Bill would briefly emerge from the back to deal with any issues, before retreating again. One particular customer gave me the creeps. He was a tall, skeletal man with hollow eyes and dirty clothes. He bought a cup of coffee and a donut. When I gave him his change, he grabbed my hand and stared at me for a few seconds before letting go. I shuddered after he left. Around 3 a.m., things quieted down again. I took the opportunity to familiarize myself with the store. It was your standard convenience store layout. Up front was the register area and a bunch of snack shelves. Towards the back was the refrigerated section with drinks and frozen food. And in the very back was a small storage area and employee bathroom. I was bored and decided to take a bathroom break. The employee bathroom was dingy and cramped. A heavy smell of bleach hung in the air. As I was washing my hands, I thought I heard a noise coming from the storage area. I paused and listened closely but didn't hear anything else, so I shrugged it off. When I came out of the bathroom, Bill was back up front. He told me he was going to take a quick nap in his car and that I'd be on my own for a bit. Not long after he left, the front door chimed, and in walked the creepy, skeletal man from earlier. He walked slowly around the store, picking up various items and putting them back down again. I tried to avoid eye contact with him while still keeping tabs on what he was doing. After a few minutes, he approached the counter with some beef jerky and a soda. As I rang him up, he looked directly into my eyes and whispered, "You should be careful around here at night. Real careful." Then he smiled, revealing a mouth of yellow, cracked teeth. I handed him his change, and he sat down at a table near the front door, slowly eating his beef jerky while continuing to stare at me. I was extremely unnerved and relieved when Bill finally returned about 20 minutes later. I watched as the man stood up, tossed his trash in the bin, and exited the store. I told Bill about the creepy man. "Yeah, that's Eddie. Don't worry about him, he's harmless. Just a weird old man who hangs around here at night," Bill grunted. The next couple weeks were uneventful. I worked a few more overnight shifts and got used to the usual stream of customers. Truckers, students, and other assorted night owls wandering in for snacks, gas, and caffeine fixes. But I didn't see Eddie again, and was starting to feel more comfortable working the graveyard shift alone. One night, however, the store was oddly quiet. Starting around 2 a.m., over 2 hours went by without a single customer. I restocked some shelves, cleaned up a bit, and did some studying during the downtime. Around 4:30, I started to get creeped out by the unusual emptiness of the store. I felt isolated and vulnerable way back here behind the counter in the middle of the night. In an attempt to shake off the uneasy feeling, I decided to do a walkthrough of the store. I locked up the register and headed toward the back. As I walked past each aisle, everything seemed normal. I checked the storage area and bathroom, nothing amiss. But as I approached the far back corner of the store, I detected a musty odor that got stronger the closer I got. The smell seemed to be emanating from inside the large upright cooler where the milk and other refrigerated items were kept. I slowly opened the cooler door, the foul odor now overpowering. In the dim glow of the cooler lights, I could see a shape crammed awkwardly onto one of the lower shelves amidst spilled and broken bottles and jars. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with horror that it was a human body. I stumbled backward, horror-stricken by the decomposing, ripped-apart corpse shoved inside the cooler. I ran back up to the front, dialing 911 as I went. Within minutes, the store was swarming with police. The grisly remains were identified as a young female who had been reported missing over a week ago. There were no surveillance cameras inside the store, so the police had nothing to go on. I told them about Eddie, but with just a vague description to go off of, they didn't have much hope of tracking him down. Over the next week, I couldn't shake the image of that torn-up corpse from my mind. I decided not to return to my job at the 7-Eleven. The whole experience had completely unsettled me. But in my dreams, that faceless body haunted me. I found myself driving back to the store late at night. Whether dreaming or awake, I could no longer tell. Half expecting to see Eddie emerge from those glass doors to terrorize me again. My nights blurred into a surreal loop of the graveyard shift. I knew I had to avoid that place or else fully succumb to its horrors. In the end, the police investigation turned up nothing, and the case eventually went cold. I moved away to distance myself from the memories. But even now, years later, I still feel the occasional irresistible pull back to that fateful 7-Eleven. Though I know returning would surely mean my demise, sometimes late at night I still find my car drifting down those familiar roads, approaching that fluorescent glow under the darkened sky. It's only a matter of time before I walk through those automatic glass doors and back into that nightmare shift that never ends. I started working the graveyard shift at 7-Eleven. It wasn't exactly how I pictured my life going after high school, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The overnight manager position paid pretty well for a retail job, so I took the job and prepared myself for long, boring nights of mopping floors and dealing with drunk customers. For the most part, that's exactly what those nights were like, until that one night back in October. It was a Thursday, about 3 a.m. The store had been dead for a couple of hours, not unusual for a weekday night. I was occupying myself by restocking some of the cooler shelves up front. That's when I heard the chime as the front door opened. I didn't think much of it at first, just another random customer stopping in for a late-night snack run. But as I finished up stocking, no one came down the aisle. No one came up to the counter either. The store was silent again. I chalked it up to someone having second thoughts and leaving. But just to be sure, I decided to take a walk up front. The front area looked empty at first glance, but that's when I noticed the bathroom door was closed. I could see the occupied sign flipped to the front. Okay, so someone was here after all. I went back to stocking shelves and tidying up, figuring they'd come out eventually. But 10 minutes went by and whoever it was still hadn't left the bathroom. That struck me as odd. What were they doing in there for so long? My mind started to wander, thinking up various creepy scenarios. I tried to shake it off, telling myself everything was fine. People sometimes took their time in public restrooms. Still, I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling creeping over me. I decided to do another check just to ease my nerves. The bathroom door remained closed, light off, still occupied. Now I was really starting to get freaked out. I looked around the store and confirmed there was absolutely no one else inside. It was 3:30 at this point and eerily quiet outside. I realized if something was wrong, I was alone to deal with it. My hands shook a little as I walked back to the counter. I picked up the store phone and dialed 911, keeping my finger over the call button just in case. Watching the bathroom door intently, I built up the nerve to go check one more time. I slowly approached, leaning in close to press my ear against the metal door. Silence. My heart pounded in my chest. That sense of dread consumed me. Something was very wrong here. I called out nervously, "Hello, is everything okay in there?" No answer. Hand hovering over the 911 call button, I managed to say, "I'm going to open the door now to check on you." Still no response. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed open the door. The small bathroom was empty, no one inside. The light flickered eerily. I stood there in shock, confused and terrified. How was this possible? The occupied sign had been flipped in front of me. The door was locked from the inside. There was no other exit. I distinctly remembered hearing the chime when the front door opened earlier. But I had been completely alone this whole time. In a state of panic, I rushed back up front, hitting the lights to illuminate every corner of the store. I checked behind the counter, down the aisles, anywhere someone could possibly hide. But I was truly by myself. The ominous feeling in the pit of my stomach told me something unnatural had been in that bathroom, and whatever it was had vanished without a trace once I opened the door. I called the police and tried to explain what happened. They seemed skeptical, but said they'd send a patrol car over to check things out. I waited anxiously, doors locked, praying nothing else bizarre would happen before they arrived. The officers searched the store and found nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of a break-in or foul play. Unable to offer any evidence of something supernatural, they dismissed it as an overactive imagination due to working alone late at night. They recommended I leave the bathroom light on and put a bell on the door if it made me feel better. But there was not much else they could do without proof of an actual crime taking place. After that night, I never again worked a shift by myself. I begged my manager to schedule me overlapping with someone else. She seemed puzzled by my sudden refusal to close alone, but agreed to accommodate me. I even brought my dog along to keep me company, too afraid to be there past midnight with just the phantom shoppers that apparently roamed the store. I still wonder what sort of entity occupied that bathroom, and why it revealed itself to me. My theory is that it wanted me to know it was there, that it had free rein in the stillness of the night. I never thought working the night shift at 7-Eleven would be a terrifying experience, but let me tell you, this job has given me more than a few sleepless nights. It all started about 3 months ago when I got hired as the new overnight cashier. The store manager warned me that it could be eerie being there alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but I figured I could handle it. I'm not someone who scares easily. The first couple weeks were pretty uneventful. I'd get the occasional drunk customer wandering in late at night, but they never caused too much trouble. My main responsibilities were just running the register, stocking shelves, and dealing with the random food cravings people get at 2 or 3 in the morning. Overall, it was an easy, if a bit boring job. But then things started to get strange. It began with small noises and occurrences that I at first brushed off. The wind howling outside sounded more like whispers. Knocking sounds came from the storage room when I knew no one else was there. Doors slowly creak open by themselves. Shadows passed by the windows faster than any person could. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Working alone in dim, fluorescent lighting while high on caffeine does things to you. But the weird activity kept escalating, and before long, I couldn't deny that something unusual was going on. It was a Tuesday night when the flickering lights finally forced me to admit I was dealing with more than an overactive imagination. I was restocking the cooler with Gatorades when all the lights suddenly cut out, plunging the store into total darkness. Before I could even react, they flashed back on, then off, then on again, pulsing erratically. The temperature also seemed to drop 20 degrees in an instant. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me as I stood there paralyzed. Then I heard it. A raspy whisper coming from directly behind me saying, "Get out." I whirled around, heart pounding, but no one was there. The voice didn't sound human. It sounded like a death rattle. The lights continued blinking, on and off, as I rushed to the front counter. I picked up the phone to call the manager, when suddenly all the lights shut off completely, and every monitor and digital display went dead. I was completely alone in the dark. Slowly, I made my way to the front door, feeling my way along. As I reached for the handle, the entire building started to shake. I heard glass bottles rattling on the shelves, coffee pots crashing to the floor. It felt like an earthquake. Terrified, I pushed through the door and burst out into the parking lot. I turned back to look at the store, which was now perfectly still and quiet. Had I imagined the whole thing? I hesitated only a moment before deciding I wasn't going back inside tonight. The store could stay closed until morning when others arrived. I got in my car and drove away, trying to slow my racing pulse. When I came back for my next overnight shift, the manager asked why I had abandoned my post. I told him about the bizarre incident while he nodded calmly. "Yeah, we've been meaning to mention that to you," he said casually. "The store's haunted." I stared at him. Haunted? I didn't believe in ghosts. The manager explained that they think a man named George who used to work overnights decades ago still lingers here. Numerous employees have reported George terrorizing them over the years. He likes to make noises, flicker lights, move objects around. Typical ghost behavior. The manager offered to let me switch to a daytime schedule, but I turned him down. I needed this job, and I still wasn't fully convinced George was real. There had to be some rational explanation, so I continued working my overnight shifts, no matter how creepy the atmosphere could get. One time, all the car magazines flew off the rack as I walked past. Another night, a little girl's laugh echoed through the store, even though I was completely alone. Doors would randomly slam shut, shadows would dart across aisles, disembodied footsteps would approach, then stop right before reaching me. But things escalated to a whole new level of disturbing a few weeks later. It was almost 3, and the store was empty aside from me. As I sat reading a book while snacking on some combos, I suddenly smelled something foul, like rotten meat mixed with acidic vomit. I gagged and looked around trying to identify the source, but couldn't find anything. Then the stench intensified, becoming overpowering, and I heard a stomach-turning, sizzling noise. I followed the putrid odor to the hot food station, where the nacho cheese machine was bubbling over. Except it wasn't cheese inside. It was a thick, chunky, neon orange liquid that looked like boiling vomit. Noxious fumes rose from the vat. I rushed to unplug the machine, but as I bent down to disconnect it, a deafening scream exploded right behind me. The force of the noise was like being hit by a shockwave. It wasn't human. It sounded like a banshee cry combined with nails on a chalkboard amplified at full volume. I whipped around, but again no one was there. Meanwhile, the bizarre orange sludge started leaking out from the nacho machine, spreading across the floor and eating through shoes and shelves like acid. That was enough for me. I fled the store, the phantom's wail chasing me into the night. I didn't stop running until I was locked in my car, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. After that night, I decided I had to quit. I wouldn't step foot in that store again, even in the daytime. I was convinced the ghost of George was trying to drive me away permanently, and he had succeeded. When I went to resign the next day, the manager completely understood given all that had been happening. But before I left for good, he invited me to review some of the security footage from the overnight cameras. I reluctantly agreed, part of me curious to see if any of the strange activity had been captured. What I saw on those tapes still gives me chills to this day. One video showed a rack of sunglasses flying off the shelf by itself, while I was facing the other direction. Another showed the bathroom sink somehow turning on full blast while I was up front at the register. But the most bone-chilling footage was from the night with the phantom scream. When I watched the tape, I saw myself bending over to unplug the nacho machine, just like I remembered. But just as that ear-splitting wail blared out, a dark, ghostly shape seemed to manifest right behind me. It hovered there for several seconds before vanishing. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't my imagination. The video didn't lie. Something terrifying was haunting that 7-Eleven, and I'm grateful I escaped when I did. I decided to do some research online about the history of that store and discovered a creepy backstory. Apparently in the 1970s, a cashier named George Malloy did suffer a fatal heart attack while working the overnight shift all alone. His body wasn't discovered until the morning manager arrived to open it. The more I read about old George, the more I realized the details aligned with what I had experienced. George was known for playing harmless pranks and giggling like a child. He loved reading car magazines. He had a fondness for spicy combos, and he was notorious for having terrible indigestion that resulted in foul-smelling flatulence. Needless to say, I turned in my uniform and never returned to that haunted 7-Eleven. I couldn't handle another chilling overnight run-in with George's ghost. My brief stint as an overnight cashier taught me that ghosts are indeed real, and they enjoy terrorizing convenience store employees just trying to make an honest living. I'll take the sight of living, breathing customers over dead, lingering spirits any day, no matter how annoying the graveyard shift gets. I just hope the poor soul who took over my job survived their encounters with George. Some scary stories don't end when you stop believing.